Hey everybody, in this video we'll be taking a look at some ancient Chinese ethics, namely that of Kongzi and Mozi, or Confucius and Mozi. Now, Kongzi taught almost 2,500 or more years ago, and in his thinking, he said if we look back to ancient China, even more ancient than 2,500 years ago, everything was in balance, the kingdoms worked great, and since then there's been a series of downfalls of various kingdoms, there's been fracturing, and how do we get back to the harmony that existed in the past? And he says there's some things that we can do. The right kind of person is a zhongzi, so a righteous person. Sometimes it's translated as gentleman. You want to be that. You want to be a gentleman. You want to be a person who understands virtue or de and lives by the Dao, the way that one ought to live by. And you don't want to be a qiaozhen, literally a tiny person, the opposite of a gentleman, someone who doesn't understand virtue, someone who doesn't understand what you ought to do. And so first, briefly, let's take a look at what Kongzi says about the notion of the Zhongyang, or the doctrine of the mean. So all this work, the Zhongyang, was probably written by Zizi, Kongzi's grandson, and nevertheless is part of the Confucian tradition. And it starts with this: what heaven, Tian, imparts to man is called human nature. To follow our nature is called the way, the Tao. Cultivating the way is called education. The way cannot be separated from us for a moment. What can be separated from us is not the way. Therefore, the superior man, the zhongzi, is cautious over what he does not see and apprehensive over what he does not hear. There is nothing more visible than that which is hidden, and nothing more manifest than that which is subtle. Therefore, the superior man, the zhongzi, is watchful over himself when he is alone. The zhongzi maintains integrity. He's the same person he is when he's alone and when he's around other people, not shifting who one is. Before the feelings of pleasure, anger, sorrow, and joy are aroused, it is called equilibrium. That is, in the translation you see before you, it says Cheng, but we also have it as Zhong, the notion of centrality or mean. Now here, whereas Aristotle had a notion of mean like it's virtue is a mean between two vices, here the notion of mean or Zhong means balance or equilibrium. When these feelings are aroused and each and all attain due measure and degree, it is called harmony. Equilibrium is the great foundation of the world, and harmony is the universal path. When equilibrium and harmony are realized to the highest degree, heaven and earth will attain their proper order and all things will flourish. The way things ought to be, this notion in Kongzi of Tian, and the way things are here on earth, they will match. When one has an understanding of equilibrium, one ought to be a balanced person. The zhongzi is someone who understands balance and understanding the way things ought to be. Well, how should things be then? The zhongzi should especially seek to implement the notion of the Zhangming, which is translated as the rectification in names in English. If I were to translate this into English, I would say it's the rectifying of roles. That is, getting right the jobs that we have in our families. So, in the Analects of Confucius, another work by Kongzi, we see Kongzi ask this question. Zilu asks him, if the Lord of Wei were to employ you to serve in the government of his state, what would be your first priority? And the master answered, it would be, of course, to assure that Ming, names, but we can translate that really as roles or what we're supposed to do, our jobs, were being applied Zhang correctly. There's the Zhang Ming right there. Correct names. Correct jobs, correct roles. What does that mean? Zilu said, is this really a matter of concern? Really, that's what you do? It would seem that the master's suggestion is rather wide of the mark. Why worry about correcting names? The master replied, how boorish you are, Zilu. When it comes to matters that he does not understand, the gentleman, remember the zhongzi, should refrain from flaunting his ignorance. And look at Kongzi's reasoning here. If names are not correct, speech will not be in accordance with actuality. When speech is not in accordance with actuality, things will not be successfully accomplished. When things are not successfully accomplished, ritual practice and music will fail to flourish. When ritual and music fail to flourish, punishments and penalties will miss the mark. And when punishments and penalties miss the mark. The people will be at a loss as to what to do with themselves. This is why the gentleman only applies names that can be properly spoken and assures that what he says can be properly put into action. The gentleman simply guards against arbitrariness in his speech. That is all there is to it. So Kongzi made kind of a chain argument there where he said if names aren't right, all these other things will happen. Music and ritual won't happen. Penalties and punishments will be distorted. There'll be rampant injustice in the land. People won't know what to do. But all that could be stopped if you just get names right. And the gentleman, the junzi, knows this. So what does it mean to get names right? Again, names here, or Ming, means like a role or a job. And especially he has in mind those that we have in our family in society. Let's take a look. So what you see here, and these aren't in any particular order really, but these, according to Kongzi, are the main kinds of relationships that exist in society. Now, they're all rendered in masculine terms, but we could make some adjustments here. But here are the 5 basic kinds of relationships. There's the father-son relationship. Again, we could say parent-child, mother-daughter, father-daughter, mother-son. That's fine, but he always talks about it in terms of it being father-son relationship. We can talk about elder siblings and younger siblings. We can talk about the elders in society and the youth in society. We can talk about the husband and the wife, married couples, the spousal relationship, and then we can talk about the relationship between the ruler and the subject, the king and the people. Now, Kongzi says these are the most central relationships that one has in life. You'll notice what's not on the list. It doesn't say friend to friend, because the focus is on the family and society. And in short, what Kongzi's saying is, if you get these relationships right, that's what will produce the benefit for society as a whole. And everyone ends up getting happy as a result. So in short, find where you are on the list and do your job, and the job is the corresponding virtue. So for example, in the father-son relationship, which Kongzi spends the most time talking about because he really thinks that's the most important kind of relationship, and really the other relationships on the list are kind of echoes of that. Even the ruler-subject is a kind of father-son relationship. Keep in mind, even the word patriotism has at its root the word for father in Latin. And so fathers should be kind to their sons. Sons are supposed to exhibit a particular kind of piety, filial piety. That means the piety of a son. A particular kind of respect. Even for Kongzi, after the parents are dead, it's not good to badmouth your parents ever. It's not good to betray your parents. And that's really the central relationship. Get that right. Fathers be proper to their sons. Sons exhibit the proper dignity to their fathers. Everything else will just sink into place. And all those other kinds of virtues that you see in the other kinds of relationships, like the ruler is to be benevolent and the subject is to be loyal. Again, echoes of being kind to one's child, but also filial piety. You're supposed to have the same kind of loyalty to your ruler as you have to your father, kind of, but the father loyalty, the loyalty to one's own family, and especially the father, is the most important. At one point in the Analects, too, there's even a conversation between Kongzi and someone else where someone mentions that in their kingdom, kids even turn in their parents when they commit crimes. And Kongzi is aghast. He says, that's not right. That's a complete disruption of the way things ought to be. You should have children being loyal to their parents, not turning them in and writing them out. Loyalty to one's father is of the utmost import. And really, you should figure out, how am I supposed to be treating each person as they accord on the list? How am I supposed to treat my father? How am I supposed to treat my king? How am I supposed to treat my elder siblings? How am I supposed to treat the youth in society? And figure out where are you on the list and do that job. Rectify that name. Don't get things out of accordance with what they're supposed to be. So you shouldn't treat your younger brother like your father with the same kind of dignity. That's not who they are. The ruler shouldn't treat their subjects like their own father. That's not right either. You need to get the names right. Now, while Kongzi wasn't exactly popular in his own time, about 2,600 years ago, a standardized form of Confucianism becomes the dominant view during the Han Dynasty. It's part of the Chinese culture of 2,000 years ago. Much to the chagrin of the next thinker that I want to look at, who is Mozi, and he is not happy about Kongzi. Pretty much, if Kongzi said it, it's wrong. What does he say? So this is from a book called The Mozi, which is a collection of works by Mozi and by some of the followers of Mozi, or Motsu. Our teacher Mozi says, the business of a benevolent person is to promote what is beneficial to the world and eliminate what is harmful. Our teacher Mozi says it is things such as great states attacking small states, great families wreaking havoc with lesser families, the strong robbing the weak, the many doing violence to the few, the clever deceiving the ignorant, and the noble acting arrogantly toward the humble. These are some of the great harms being done in the world. In addition, there are rulers who are not kind, ministers who are not loyal, fathers who are not loving, and children who are not filial. These too are some of the great harms in the world. There are also those of low character, who use weapons, poison, water, and fire to injure and steal from one another. These too are some of the great harms in the world. If we try to discover the origin of these different harms, where do we find they come from? Do they come from caring for and benefiting people? They clearly must be rejected as the origin of these harms. We must recognize that they come from hating and stealing from people. If we wish to distinguish those in the world who hate and steal from people, do we refer to them as impartial or partial? We clearly must call them partial. And so it is that those who are partial in their dealings with others, they're the ones who are the real cause of the great harms in the world. Now, it's subtle, but Mozi just called out Kangzi. The whole thing of figuring out where you are on the list of the names, that's partiality. Partiality is to treat certain people in a certain way and others not in a certain way. You shouldn't treat your subjects like your father. You shouldn't treat your spouse like a son. You figure out what's the right role and you treat them accordingly. That's partiality. Mozi just said the problem with society is partiality. That's the problem. That's not the solution, which is what Kangzi was saying. Now he continues. This is why our teacher Mozi says, I condemn partiality. Replace partiality with impartiality. Our teacher Mozi says, if people regarded other people's states in the same way that they regard their own, who would then incite their own state to attack that of another? For one would do for others as one would do for oneself. If people regarded other people's cities in the same way that they regard their own, who then would incite their own city to attack that of another? For one would do for others as one would do for oneself. If people regarded other people's families in the same way that they regard their own, who then would incite their own family to attack that of another? For one would do for others what one would do for oneself. And so, if states and cities do not attack one another and families do not wreak havoc upon and steal from one another, would this be a harm to the world or a benefit? Of course, it would be a benefit to the world. And Mozi says, I approve of impartiality. Moreover, earlier I said that the business of a benevolent person is to promote what is beneficial to the world and eliminate what is harmful. And now I have shown that impartiality gives rise to all the great benefits in the world and that partiality gives rise to all the great harms in the world. So first off, this notion of impartiality, sometimes called impartial caring or indiscriminate love, is Zhongyang. And what that means is to treat everybody the same. It's not just, oh, we need to get things right on the list. You know, sons, you're supposed to love your fathers in a certain kind of way and serve them in a certain kind of way. Rulers need to treat subjects in a certain kind of way. Elders treat youth in a certain kind of way. And where are you on the list? And friends aren't even on the list because family is most important. Mozi says, you know what works? And it's actually beneficial for everyone. Treat everybody the same. If everybody were to treat everybody else exactly the same, you wouldn't steal from other people because you wouldn't want to steal from yourself. You wouldn't want to cause harm to others because you wouldn't want to cause harm to yourself. And Mozi also says, someone who gets this and realizes that you want to be a kind person should go out promoting this as well. It's not just one thing to think it, you should do what you can to make this happen. This is at odds at Kangzi, who says, no, we need to treat our own families in such a way that we're treating people in very distinct relationships in a very appropriate, proper ways. Mozi's saying that's the problem with society. When you do that, is everybody starts treating people in their own ways. He's not my father, I don't care about him because I have no loyalty to him, and people start bickering in between individuals, between families, between cities, between kingdoms, between empires. Mozi says you shouldn't want to promote that because in the short term, it might seem good for you that, we get to conquer these other people and we're going to win. But on the whole, it does harm because those people also want to do that to you. So it should be promoted for everybody. So the universal love, indiscriminate love, impartial caring is something that ought to be promoted. Despite Mozi's protestations against the work of Kangzi and his thought, and really he has it more out for the actual Confucians, the followers of Confucius, than Kangzi himself. Nevertheless, Confucianism becomes the dominant view during the Han Dynasty, whereas the thought of Mozi kind of fizzles out. Although there has been a resurgence in interest in Mozi over the last couple of decades. So that concludes this video on talking about these Chinese thinkers Kangzi and Mozi. So coming up, we'll be transitioning from talking about ancient ethics to looking at various kinds of relativisms: ethical subjectivism, cultural relativism, and divine command.